All right, we're live. Welcome to a special edition of an FF Metrics episode where we'll break down coaching hires, the Senior Bowl, and give you a mini preview on the upcoming Super Bowl. I'm your host this evening, AndrewDFS. Joined alongside me is the owner and founder of FF Metrics, RC Fischer. If you haven't done so already, check out RC's website, ffmetrics.com, for the best fantasy football advice, projections, handicapping advice, and now more recently with scouting advice. Now that's going to become more apparent with the football season being over, and you're definitely going to want to hear his takes on the upcoming NFL draft, commentary on that, how to bet it. So although the season is almost over, the fun is not going to stop on ffmetrics.com.
I'm shifting from king of props to king of draft scouting. I'm making that transition this week with the Senior Bowl. And we're all killing it on the props for the playoffs. It's sad that we've only got one game left of props to go. Everybody in our handicapping group has been on such a heater with props. But shifting from prop mode to scouting mode, but then apparently there's been some coaching changes in the NFL taking
That's
place.
right. That's right.
Every time I turn around, my phone goes off. Somebody else is hired, fired, replaced.
And all the vacancies, RC, they're all filled up now. Not to say that we can't get another one.
I don't think we're done yet.
We might not be done, and we'll talk about that too. But let's start from A to Z. So what we're gonna do is talk about all eight head coaching hires, one of which was a interim coach getting promoted to the full-time role. Let's start with Jerod Mayo taking over for Bill Belichick in New England. Is going to be a good fit with the Patriots?
It'll be a good fit because he's what they want. It's not going to be a good fit for wins and bringing back the division championship ways, but it fits what they want. They're into a family member, somebody who's steeped in the tradition, comes out of the Belichick tree, which you would think by now everybody in the league should have learned that the Belichick tree is filled with poison fruit, and when you go to pick it, you're going to eat it and die. So what do the Patriots do? They just go right to, the Patriots haven't had a chance to get burned by Belichick assistants, so now they're getting their chance to be burned by a Belichick assistant. He's the defensive coordinator they have. I don't really know a lot about him. They're having a hard time finding an offensive coordinator. Nobody really wants to go to the Patriots in general, just from geography to Mayo being such a rookie coach. Maybe he's going to be great, but there's a big leap from, it's like watching the Senior Bowl. There's a coach for the American team. He was the Titans defensive line coach and assistant coach to Mike Vrabel. So you'd think that, assistant head coach, he must be, an up-and-comer. He's going to be a shark that's looking for an opportunity to be a head coach elsewhere. A lot of times, these assistant coaches of the main head coach, they're just kind of the like what the vice president is to the president of the United States, like not a real factor. You hope they never have to take over, and they're really just carrying the water for the head coach, maybe doing some of the dirty work for the head coach. I don't see, besides like McVay, I don't see these teams really surrounding themselves with a ton of great talent that's going to be future coaches or challenge, even the head coach someday. So Mayo's having a tough time. He doesn't have enough connections outside of the Patriots coaches like McDaniel and O'Brien
Mm-hmm.
and all that. I mean, he's got players he knows from the past, but no real coaching experience. So I think everything that I see right now, this looks like it's going to be a disaster. The Patriots are already a disaster as a roster, and then now you're going to put a rookie head coach with limited experience in the outside world off the poison Belichick tree. That's a defensive guy that you know darn well is going to be over focused on defense and run game, which has been the death. I mean, I think almost every coaching opening that happened taking out former defensive coordinators turned head coaches that got all wrapped up in a run game defense and didn't develop a real offense, and they all got bounced and they're all getting replaced. So Mayo just fits in that group that's wanting to be fired a year or two, one and done, or maybe two and done. They'll probably be loyal to him for his Patriot service, but that loyalty will probably end after 2 seasons max, is my gut feel on where that's going right now. I think he was the first coach hired. He still doesn't have an offensive coordinator.
Yeah, and I'm thinking RC, maybe that might be McDaniels just coming back to the Patriots. I mean, he's not head coaching material, but maybe he can do okay as an offensive coordinator. But the problem is they just don't have the talent. Now, they have, I believe, the third overall pick in the upcoming draft. Maybe they draft a Jaden Daniels or another QB of that nature and perhaps is an upgrade over Mac Jones, but we won't know till April.
Josh McDaniels proven to be toxic and terrible anywhere outside of being under Belichick, and Belichick only mattered when he had Brady. So the whole group of them have been exposed. I just don't know how Jerod Mayo. He may be the nicest guy. He may be the rah rah speech guy, but running an NFL team as a head coach is totally different. And where I was going with the Senior Bowl coach is he's he was the assistant. He was defensive line coach. I'm watching him at the Senior Bowl. He's like stock footage. He's like Hollywood hired to be a defensive line coach. He just looks like a defensive line coach. He acts like a defensive line coach, and he seems to be really good at that. He really connects with the players. He's given them talking about techniques that have been interesting to listen to. He's really good at that, but I I don't see any other head coaching spark. It's not he's never with the offense, never speaks to you gotta run the offense, you gotta run the defense, especially you got to handle press conferences and all that kind of stuff. So I'm sure Jerod Mayo bleeds for the Patriots, but that's not good enough. We'll see. I want to see who he hires for an offensive coordinator. I want to see who he goes after in free agency. I want to see who they go after for the draft before I condemn him or not. But on the outside looking in, this just looks like more rotten Belichick fruit about to happen.
Yeah. And speaking of rotten Belichick fruit failing, this next franchise, Las Vegas Raiders, they hired Josh McDaniels, I believe, 2 or 3 years ago and fired him mid-season. And then Antonio Pierce, who used to play linebacker for the Giants, won a Super Bowl with them, took over the Raiders' job as the interim coach and led them on a little run towards the end of the season. Definitely a player's coach. A lot of players went on the record voicing their support for him, and he was the defensive coordinator. So Max Crosby had a special relationship with him, and he went as far as to saying that he would demand a trade if Pierce didn't get the job. So they were in a similar situation like this with, I think, Vic Bisaccia. I don't know if I said the name right. Vic Bisaccia, like,
Yeah, Rich Bisaccia.
oh, Rich Bisaccia, sorry, 2 years ago when he took over and they ended up going with McDaniels instead. So now, we're in a similar spot, but this time Mark Davis ended up hiring Pierce. RC, do you think they can continue their late season momentum where they played great defense. They're always still a little shaky, but what I remember from the Raiders towards the end is they were pretty feisty on D.
I think there's only maybe 1, 2, or 3 head coaches that actually matter in the NFL for the positive. All you can hope for the rest is that they're not too much of a negative. Most of what I've seen of head coaches over the last 15 years of doing this is coaches having a negative effect on player performances, and like the whole Arthur Smith disaster in Atlanta. It's like they just get in the way and create problems. Like Josh McDaniels, for example, the players hate them. Performance is terrible. They can't draft. They only know one side of the ball. Everything just ends up being a disaster. That's why there's always this churn going on. So I look at Pierce. I don't believe he's going to be in one of the holy top 3 spots of like, wow, this guy's the greatest coach ever. He came in after a guy they all hated and was rah-rah and all that, got them believing in themselves. And that's a good thing because, I don't, with the exception of like Sean McVay and maybe 1 or 2 others, nobody's coming in there with this master plan that they're putting together. And it's like a symphony of coaching brilliance. It's usually, maybe more Dan Campbell. You got to get them juiced up and believing and ready to go. So I don't think Pierce is going to be a legendary head coach. I'm just hoping he doesn't have a giant negative on them. It's great to be all rah-rah and defense and all of that, but where Dan Campbell went that route, but he has arguably the best offensive coordinator in the game to run, and he was smart enough to just kind of give him a long leash to run the offense. I don't know that Antonio Pierce is going to do that. He hired Cliff Kingsbury tonight, which is an odd pairing. That at least gives me some hope that I would have figured Antonio Pierce would have hired some run game retread. You bring in Cliff Kingsbury, you're saying I want to run a totally different offense. We're going to try to make a leap to number 1 in the draft to get Caleb Williams. Is just my initial thought when I see Kingsbury going there. I thought they were going after Jaden Daniels, and maybe they're going to. They just want Kingsbury to make him like a Kyler Murray. But I would have, if we were doing this morning, I would have said, I'm afraid Antonio Pierce is going to kind of just be the next Steve Wilkes, the next defensive rah-rah that kind of fizzles out. And he may only be as good as Patrick Graham, who's a really good defensive coordinator, who may leave in a couple of years for an opportunity, and then Pierce will be exposed as not being able to run an entire organization on rah-rah. But him bringing in Cliff Kingsbury, that's a real curveball. That's a real interesting hire that hopefully is going to be like what Dan Campbell's doing. It's like an admittance of, hey, I like the defense. I know the defense. I'm going to try to give us a tough-minded edge, but we got to have an offense or we're never going to get anywhere. So that's why you would hire a Cliff Kingsbury, because you want to be a little unique on offense. So I am now moved from negative to hopeful on Antonio Pierce with the Cliff Kingsbury hire. For an offensive coordinator, he's one of the better. You don't want Cliff Kingsbury running your organization, but you do like him calling your plays and working with the quarterbacks. Patrick Graham is one of the better defensive coordinators, so this could be like what Nick Sirianni got away with, where you get great coordinators and they will carry you. You get bad coordinators and you may be smart as a whip, but you're going to fail.
Yeah.
So I think
we saw Nick do that with Shane Steichen, right? And Jonathan Gannon. But this year, I think there's another situation like that with Dan Campbell, right? Like his two coordinators seem to be highly regarded and carrying him, because it seems like anytime Dan Campbell gets the opportunity, he tries to do something weird and blow up the game. And that's exactly what happened last week and probably was the reason why they lost.
I think if Ben Johnson would have left, would have taken a head coaching job, I would have then wanted to see who they replaced him with. But without Ben Johnson, I wonder if the Lions wouldn't finish in third place next year, and this whole momentum goes away, and then the rah-rah goes away, and they don't have another punch they can pull because Ben Johnson was helping them because their defense was terrible, and Dan Campbell's more run game defense or oriented. That's why it's been so shocking that he let Ben Johnson handle the offense, very self-aware. But will he, when he has to replace Ben Johnson, will he be able to come up with the next offensive gem, or just did he get super lucky? We won't know for another year. I think Ben Johnson coming back could mean the Lions are the favorite in the NFC, the entire NFC next year. Where if Ben Johnson didn't come back, I think the Lions wouldn't have finished
Could have
first
missed
in
playoffs.
the NFC North. The NFC North's got good teams in it. There's no playing around. There's no room to slip with a bad offensive coordinator. I mean, just look what happened to the Eagles when the offensive coordinator situation caught up to them. So yeah. I'm hopeful for Pierce. Where are you at on Pierce? Are you or con?
I'm somewhere in the middle. I don't dislike it as much as a Mayo hire, but I need to see what they do at the quarterback position, because I don't think Aiden O'Connell is the answer for them. So I'm really curious to see if they trade up, get one of the top three guys, or do they wait for a day two guy, like maybe Penix falls in the second round, or they trade back and grab another QB like that, McCarthy or someone. I mean, not that I'm high on those QBs, but they need to, if they don't have the QB position addressed, doesn't matter how good of a coach you are, you're probably out of there in 2 to 3 years.
I think, where are they? They would have to move up. I think they would have to pour out some bullets to move up
big time.
If anybody's willing to trade with them. If they can get up in that top tier and somehow walk away with Jaden Daniels, who Pierce knows from Arizona State, with Kingsbury,
I like it.
Running that type of offense, then it would have my full attention. So, but I'm with you. I would, if I had the choice between Pierce and Mayo, just from what we know at this point, I'm taking Pierce in that situation. The Las Vegas coordinators, everything looks up for Pierce now, but I'm kind of on the fence as to whether he's really a good coach or not.
Yeah,
but he's got a great situation.
There's a lot of uncertainty too. Like, we don't know how these GMs, what they're gonna do, like when during free agency, during the draft. So like, I kind of want to put an asterisk by that answer, because if I see Mayo go after like a bunch of great like defensive players, offensive players, which is what they've been lacking, then I might change my opinion on that and think that maybe the Patriots front office figured something out. You know, Belichick's not there anymore. Maybe they're going to get better offensively, but in a vacuum, I would take Pierce over Mayo.
And if I'm Las Vegas, I'm looking at my roster and I'm like, we almost made the playoffs.
They beat the Chiefs, didn't they?
Yeah, we're in a division with Mahomes and Herbert. We have got to do. We are not going to be taken seriously in this division with Aiden O'Connell. So we'll learn a lot about Antonio Pierce and the GM if they stay pat and try to sell us on Aiden O'Connell. Not that Aiden O'Connell is bad. It's just that's not a Kingsbury quarterback. That's not a threat to Mahomes and Herbert. You're delusional if you think that, and that's I just wonder if Antonio Pierce might be a little delusional. If he's not, and if he brought Kingsbury in for a purpose, if I'm them, I sell out and move up into the top two to get. I want Daniels. I don't want any. I don't want Caleb Williams, but I'm sure they'd probably be okay with Caleb Williams.
Yeah, and to move up to like, let's just think about what it costed for Carolina to move from 9 to 1. It was basically the equivalent of 3 first-round picks, a couple second-round picks, right? Moving from 13 to 1 or even 2 is going to cost more than that, just relatively speaking. And if they're actually targeting Caleb, RC, despite what you feel about the guy, he's drawing Mahomes comps, and teams are hearing that, and they will play into that as well. Bryce Young, as much as the mainstream loved him, nobody uttered a peep that this guy can be the next Mahomes, but they're saying that about Caleb. So that makes me think that maybe the comp to move up is closer to not 3 first-round picks, maybe it's 5.
If Williams ends up getting paired with Kingsbury, I will be a little more intrigued on Caleb Williams' ability to hit the ground running, because he'll be given a near perfect offense to do it in. But
Yeah.
I don't know that Antonio Pierce. The thing that's perplexing is I don't know if Antonio Pierce wants to do that. The second he took over, it was we're going heavy Josh Jacobs and we're going to rely on this defense, and it worked.
And that was their best hand to play in that situation. So now we're going to see what he does in the. Is he a one-dimensional guy? I'm just running and playing D. He's not going to last very long if he does that.
After free agency and after the draft, we'll
have a good idea.
Regrade Pierce.
Yeah, that's a good point. But let's stick in that same division, RC. The AFC West is one of 2 divisions that had 2 new head coaches. So the Chargers got rid of Staley midseason at the hands of Antonio Pierce, coincidentally, and they ended up getting probably the most coveted head coaching hire of this cycle. Michigan's Jim Harbaugh is making a return to the NFL, where he used to be the coach of the 49ers, took him to a Super Bowl, lost to his brother John Harbaugh. He had a 70% win percentage when he was in the NFL, and he's regarded as a team builder. Like he made the 49ers relevant. The way we're thinking about the Niners always in contention and everything, before Harbaugh, they were pretty much jokes between that and like the Steve Young, Joe Montana era. So Harbaugh really put the Niners on the map like a decade ago. And now they're obviously doing great with Kyle Shanahan. But long story short, RC, LA has they have the best QB situation, I believe, of anybody looking for head coaches with Justin Herbert. They have a top 5 pick, but they have salary concerns as well. There are some cap constraints. RC, do you think Harbaugh is the guy to take the Chargers to the next level and compete with the Chiefs and potentially make a deep run?
Of all of the coaches that were floating around available that you could get, I could see, if you weren't willing to take a gamble on one of the young bucks to be able to get in early on the next Sean McVay or whoever you think the top head coach in the world is, Kevin O'Connell. If you don't think you're getting the next McVay, O'Connell, and you're like, we've got a narrow window, we've already got Herbert, we've got a good team, we just need a coach. I can't deny, if I'm an owner or if I'm a GM, I don't know that I want to work with Jim Harbaugh, because he seems like quite the oddball to be around. But you can't deny he knows what he's doing with a football team. So the Chargers owner is usually kind of hands off. So of all of the things you could do, you might as well put it in Harbaugh's hands and let him hire his own GM and his own people and just go, all right, go for it. If this doesn't work, Staley didn't work, this didn't work, that didn't, it'll just be another thing that didn't work. But you can't argue with his pedigree. and experience and success. So, and he has NFL experience. It's not like this is hot shot college coach coming into the pros. He knows what he's doing. So this is probably the smartest way to rebuild your entire organization without having to overhaul all the players. So I think this could be what knocks Kansas City off the mountain in the AFC West.
Yeah,
In
and we
very
don't know
short order.
we don't know if that's going to be as early as next year. I think there's potential for it to get there, but I mean, I think this is as close to match made in heaven as you're going to get. This is probably my favorite coaching hire of this cycle, and it also marks the first time where Justin Herbert had an offensive-minded head coach, because I think he started his career with Anthony Lynn, and then they moved to Brandon Staley, obviously. So, I mean, Herbert was already great despite his head coaches kind of, holding him back. I mean, I want to see what Harbaugh, who revived Alex Smith's career, took Colin Kaepernick to new levels. I want to see what he's going to do with someone as skilled as Herbert. The only problem for me is they have such a big cap concern that they're going to have to let go of people like Mike Williams. They might even release Keenan Allen as well. So I have to see how they address that during free agency and the draft. But I mean, I think Harbaugh is just going to figure it out. He's got the quarterback there. They have names on defense. It's not like they don't have talent there. So this is probably the most talented. This is probably the best situation that you could have possibly walked into as a head coach in 2024.
And Houston Texans showed us that all it takes is the right coach, quarterback, and everything else can be fixed in fast order. It's not like the Texans had this elite, experienced group of wide receivers. They had a horrific O-line like the Chargers do. They had a up and down mess and hope on defense, just like the Chargers do. So he'll have time to gut some of. I think they'll keep Keenan Allen, but they'll ditch Michael Williams, and there's a lot of dead weight that they can ditch, but that can be rebuilt back up in 1 year.
Yeah.
When you got Herbert, and all these other pieces are just window dressing. Eckler's replaceable. Mike Williams is easily replaceable. Keenan Allen you'd like to keep, but not if he's going to ask for the way too much money. So as long as you got Herbert and Harbaugh's experience, this will happen. This can happen real quickly. And you have to give Harbaugh credit for, I'll put it in terms of my own weird self. I think if you let me be the head coach of Alabama or Florida or Georgia, I think even in my ignorance, those schools will attract talent because of the geography, the money that you have to spend. Texas, USC, even Ohio State to a degree, because Ohio's so football crazy. But to build a winner, to recruit and build a winner in Michigan when they were down in the dumps, that's some talent. That's not some fake Jimbo Fisher stuff where you just landed in the right place and rode the great college program in the South that's always on TV, so all the players want to go play in the South on TV. So to build Michigan to the national champions is pretty impressive. And what he did with the 49ers, because Colin Kaepernick proved out to not be a real quarterback once Harbaugh got away from him. So
he wins anywhere he goes, RC, whether it's Stanford. I think he started in San Diego State before that. 49ers, he hits, man. He's just a born winner. And I think that Michigan win in the national championship game, that just like was full circle for him. That was awesome to see. I was really happy because he hadn't really won a title at any level. That was his first championship, and he kind of checked the box there. And hopefully he'll do the same with the Chargers one day, because that would be a really cool story. He'll be one of the only coaches to have a Super Bowl and national championship.
He almost had it with the 49ers in his first go round. I think you can do no more than to give Jim Harbaugh a blank check and let him hire his GM and his coordinators, and you just sit back and cross
One
your
thing
fingers.
he wasn't great at, though, that I'm gonna put this as my caveat to you and my warning. I don't think he had the best draft classes in the world. So if you like go back and look at the 49ers drafts, like he inherited a lot of the players that he coached up and made great, which is kind of like what's happening with the Chargers. But if you look at like some of the picks he made 2010 to 2014, you'll kind of, I know hindsight's 2020, but it's like he barely hit on any players. So it'll be interesting if now that like he's been in college football longer, he probably has a better pulse on what's going on, who can play, who can't. But I just found it funny that like he didn't really have the best draft record with the Niners, and that probably was probably one of the reasons why he left.
He was also in a daily fight with the GM.
Maybe that was it.
And that was part of the problem, is the GM had the power over personnel. You know, it's usually the coach can set the 53 man, but the GM is the one who does free agency and the draft, and they're supposed to work hand in hand with the head coach. But those two guys flat out hated each other. Harbaugh hated his guts, hated Balky's guts, which I can understand. So there is hope if you let Harbaugh have his entire pick of the thing, and then you just sit back. Like Jerry Jones would never work with Jim Harbaugh.
Or Bill Belichick, right? Like those are people that command full control.
An owner that wants to be involved is not a great thing for Jim Harbaugh, but a blank check and an owner that steps back, this is probably going to be a good thing.
Yeah.
In short order.
Now, let's move to another head coaching hire. This one actually caught me off guard. I thought Vrabel did all he could do with the roster was handed to him. It felt like the Titans, you know, despite them not making playoffs, but for the past couple of seasons, like they always, to me, feel like they've been overperforming. I mean, last year when Tannehill went down, they played Dobbs and they almost made the playoffs and beat Jacksonville. I think one of the last regular season games, they almost beat them and made the playoffs. And then this year, you know, the roster after that AJ Brown trade, it just felt like the team went downward and their offensive line isn't all there. And obviously they plugged in Will Levis, who had some flashes, but couldn't really see his full potential. At the end of the day, Vrabel, who beat Jacksonville and prevented them from making the playoffs, right? Like that was a big shock to everybody, despite that crazy win over a division rival, ends up getting canned. And the Titans go turn around and hire Brian Callahan from the Cincinnati Bengals. RC, for me, I don't know that Callahan could do a better job than what Vrabel did with this roster.
I think Will Levis is going to be a superstar, and I think he was showing that in the most difficult of circumstances with that offensive line, that whole team concept. Will Levis could end up being the best of all of last year's quarterbacks from an NFL perspective, not a fantasy perspective. And I know CJ Stroud is elite, and I know Anthony Richardson is going to be elite, but I'm saying Levis is. We're going to look back and go,
what a draft class!
They're going to do documentaries on this draft class, and then how did everybody? Why did everybody take? It's one thing for the number one pick to bust like Bryce Young. It's going to be another when there's three other guys behind that you could have had that are going to potentially all be Hall of Famers, and it's so weird that they all went to the same division. Um,
Yeah.
but not many people believe that about Levis. They will soon enough. Levis was unbelievable last year. That Miami game, um, even the games that they lost, the pressure he was under. I mean, they virtually had no offensive. They had a terrible offensive line on purpose. The group that they started, and then that group got hurt. So then the backups, there was a lot of backups starting to have to start, and they were
Even worse.
even worse.
Yeah.
And then those guys got hurt, and then they had to start going to guy. It was so bad, and Levis was so good within those circumstances that I have a feeling that Tennessee, that the owner and the GM looked at it and went, "We gave you Will Levis. You should have, like what Houston did with CJ Stroud, what Indy did with Anthony Richardson. You should have recognized this and played him from week one. We gave you the ticket, and you're supposed to be this defensive and O-line centric guy, and we have the worst offensive line, and our defense hasn't gotten any better in years. Like, you don't deserve to coach Will Levis. If we are this was a choice of Will Levis or Mike Vrabel. They weren't going to be able to coexist, or he would have ruined Levis like Arthur Smith ruined everything in Atlanta. So I think they did the right thing by getting him out of there and going to someone who could work with Will Levis and have start to turn this team into an offensive force, not this stoic run game with a terrible offensive line. They lost so many games the last 2 years. I mean, his record the last 2 years is dreadful. The last year and a half. Um, so I think that's one of the gutsiest, best moves any team has made this offseason was to just get rid of Vrabel. We'll see if Callahan's any good. I really don't know. I'm a little worried when anybody is having success because they were in and around Joe Burrow. Just ask look at all the offensive coordinators around Tom Brady, and Joe Burrow is the closest thing to Tom Brady we have. So I I'm a little worried that he's not up for the task, but he's not Mike Vrabel, and that's a good thing. And Levis may be able to carry. Levis just needs somebody to get out of his way and give him an offensive line. Cincinnati didn't do a great job of that for Burrow, but if they can get an offensive line in Tennessee, Levis can carry them just like Aaron Rodgers carried Mike McCarthy, and just like Tom Brady carried Bill Belichick.
They have
Levis
a
can
lot of
carry.
contracts, I think, coming off the books, right? Like with Derrick Henry potentially walking, they
It's
only
like
signed up to 1 year, so they might be able to buy an offensive line, draft a couple of them, and
It's like the Justin Herbert, C.J. Stroud conversation. Hey, you got Justin Herbert, you got a chance. Just don't mess this up. Don't ruin it around him. Um, when you've got C.J. Stroud, just let him do his thing. Don't ruin it around him.
mhm.
So as long as they don't ruin it around Levis, I think he will carry them.
I did not expect you to go there with Vrabes, but I see your point with it. I'm not, I could see it. I could see it going both ways with Tennessee, but the one thing I will recognize is Levis is a pretty damn good quarterback. Now he didn't have the offensive line, but if they put that around him and they give him a couple weapons, then you never know. I mean, that division is not exactly like the strongest. Obviously, Houston's up and coming, but I think Jacksonville and Indy could easily be had. So we'll see what happens there.
It's like with Arthur Smith, you look at it and go, I choose Kyle Pitts and Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier, and you're in their way. You're the thing that the coach, Arthur Smith, is the thing that's ruining this. I either continue down the path with him being a 500 team and wasting away all these weapons, or I choose the weapons and find somebody who will just not suppress them. So I think that's what happened in Tennessee. So it's a good move. Whether it's
So
going to
you
be a
think they
great
rubbed
move,
off on each other, Arthur Smith and Brady?
I could see Vrabel going around trying to get another job. Like, hey man, you get me, you get Arthur Smith, and like the click, like hello, hello. We think we got disconnected.
Maybe that's what he was pitching during his head
I wouldn't
coaching
doubt it.
interviews, and they're like, and the people were like, "Hell no."
And I'm sure the league was like, nobody could be stupid enough to hire Arthur Smith. Oh wait, but we'll get to
Yeah,
that.
and we'll get to that. We're going to talk about OCs and DCs that got hired too. But let's move to the NFC South now, where the Carolina Panthers fired yet another coach in the middle of the season. They got rid of Frank Reich, I think, after 11 games. The season before that, I can't remember if it was Matt Rule that got fired, but this is, I believe, David Tepper's third head coaching fire. He got rid of Rivera when he took over the team, got rid of Rule, and now gets rid of Reich 11 games in. And he goes around and hires Dave Canales, who was Tampa Bay's offensive coordinator. And when they had Baker Mayfield last year in Carolina, they couldn't make it work. Canales, made it work and took Baker to the playoffs, and Baker had his statistically best season of his career, I believe. So here's the question, RC. Is Dave Canales the answer to Carolina's troubles? Can he turn it around with Bryce Young?
If anybody can, it's him, but I don't think you can turn things around with Bryce Young, so he's doomed. But Dave Canales was part of the force behind Geno Smith coming to power 2 years ago out of nowhere. Then he repeated such an event with Baker Mayfield in really tough spots to make the quarterback shine because the head coaches just wanted to run the ball and screen pass. So I think the world of Dave Canales. I thought what Tampa Bay should have done is fired Todd Bowles and then elevated Canales. I think the playoff win, it's like if there was ever a team, there's two teams that by making it to the playoffs ruined the next 2 to 5 years because it gave confidence in the organization to stick with the current head coach and the current setup, and that's the Steelers and the Buccaneers. The Buccaneers winning the division was probably one of the worst things that could have ever happened to them because they keep Todd Bowles and then they lose Dave Canales. It's going to be a problem in Tampa Bay. Dave Canales has got a future, but now I'm afraid for him. He's signed up with arguably the single worst starting quarterback in the NFL, Week 1, 2024, and I don't think Bryce Young is fixable. There is nothing to fix there. I mean, he may be a little better than what he was this past year, but you are not going anywhere. Dave Canales will not win a Super Bowl in Carolina with Bryce Young as his quarterback. And they probably are committed for another 2 years to this. And he could get blamed if it doesn't work. They'll say it was too much too fast for him. If I was Dave Canales, I would have said, look, Tennessee, hire me. I'll take less money than I can get on the open market. I just want to be linked with Will Levis and show you what I can do. And then we'll renegotiate in a couple years. Somebody made a mistake because I can't believe that Brian Callahan out resumed and out interviewed Dave Canales.
Yeah, it's
Tennessee
not like Canales
Tennessee
didn't take
should have hired
Canales.
Canales. He was available. It was there for the taking.
Yeah.
And they didn't. So
Yeah, that was my next point. Like, it's not like Carolina hired Canales and Tennessee just sat there and said, "Oh, we missed our guy." They had the opportunity to hire him.
Canales has got a chance to be one of the bright young organizational leader head coaches who can actually coach, but he can actually manage a roster and give a good press conference and everything else. Um, he could be the total package, but he just saddled himself with the worst quarterback situation that you can
Yeah,
imagine.
yeah. This is
And
probably the worst one on the
unless he's going to say after a year, "Hey,
your
we're moving
bench.
on,"
Yeah,
if Tepper will let him do that. But the longer he's linked to Bryce Young, the more danger he's going to be of getting fired.
yeah, yeah. I agree. So we'll see. I mean, I think he signed a 6-year deal with Carolina, so he might actually outlast Bryce Young there for what that's worth. But let's stick to the same division. So the AFC West and the NFC South are the only two divisions that have two head coaching hires. The Falcons fired Arthur Smith, RC's favorite coach in the NFL in history. At the conclusion of the Week 18 game, where he went up to Dennis Allen, started yelling at him for Allen running up the score. But the Falcons could have easily been in the same position as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers because they were pretty close to making the playoffs, and they could have probably beaten that Eagles team that was floundering, and the Falcons faithful could have found themselves with Arthur Smith for another 2 to 3 years, but Arthur Blank pulled the plug on that, and a lot of
Quickly.
people thought that they were going to go after Bill Belichick, RC, but they end up getting a familiar face, their interim head coach, when they fired Dan Quinn midseason in 2020. They bring Raheem Morris back to Atlanta, RC. What do you think of this one?
I don't love it because I'm not that high on Raheem Morris, but he's not bad. But the fact that he stole, I don't know if stole is the right word, but that he stole Zach Robinson, the Rams offensive coordinator. Like when you start pulling guys away from the Rams, they're probably pretty good coaches. So Raheem Morris isn't a McVay original, but he stole a McVay original with Zach Robinson. And their defensive coordinator is also tied back to the Rams as well
Jerry
in some
Lake.
way.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm not sure what the tie is there, but I know he used to coach at the University of Washington as well.
yeah, but he was in the Rams organization. I can't remember the all of the specifics. So Morris stealing Rams coaches is a good thing. I mean, if as long as Raheem Morris doesn't get in the way of success and progress with some dumb system or being too much of a defensive head coach or being like a Todd Bowles, an empty shell of a head coach, um, he with his coordinators may carry him. So it wouldn't be who I would want to get as my fresh faced new head coach that's going to attract free agent talent to my shores, and I've got all this offensive weaponry, and I hire a defensive head coach. Just, a lot of it just doesn't make any sense. But they get Zach Robinson, so that's important. So it might make it work. Just like Sirianni got covered up by his assistants, Morris could go that same route.
Yeah, and for those that don't remember, this isn't Morris's first stint as like an official head coach hire. He actually got an opportunity early in, I think like 2009 with Tampa Bay when they had Josh Freeman. So this is his second go around as like a non-interim head coach. We'll see what he does with his opportunity, but this is another situation, RC. They don't have the quarterback. So I mean, without seeing that, like he can hire Zach Robinson. Heck, they can have freaking Kyle Shanahan back, but if they have Desmond Ridder on the roster, it's not going to really matter much.
Yeah, obviously a new quarterback is going to be there, and there's so much quarterback talent out there, uh, from college to free agency to guys off the street are playing well. I mean, there's plenty of quarterbacks to go around now, you'll learn a lot about Raheem Morris and the GM by what is just like with Pierce and Jerod Mayo. You learn a lot about them, about what quarterback attracts them, and if they start getting the Bo Nixes to be game managers, or the JJ McCarthy's to be game managers and run their playbook and hand the ball off a bunch, I could really tell you the future of these coaches by who their quarterbacks are going to, what quarterbacks they go after. So I'm on the fence with Morris. We'll see what quarterback he gets. That will tell more of a story than Raheem Morris in and of his own self.
Yeah. But moving on to the next head coaching hire, RC, Mike Macdonald, who I don't believe he wasn't the defensive coordinator for Baltimore. I think he was just like an assistant, like head coach or assistant. He has a defensive background, and I think 5 of the 8 head coaching hires, surprisingly, are defensive-minded head coaches. I think a lot of the offensive coordinators have already been kind of plucked out and put into the head coaching roles. So there's a lot of them that are a little green, which is probably why it was a little more of a defensive hiring cycle than an offensive one. But anyways, Mike Macdonald, who, hearing beat writers and reporters talk about him, apparently a lot of teams really liked interviewing with him. The Seattle Seahawks, who let go of Pete Carroll after the end of the season, which kind of caught us all by surprise. I don't know if it caught you by surprise, RC, but they end up hiring Mike Macdonald, who some have even said that this guy can be the Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay of defenses. RC, do you think that this is much of an improvement over Pete Carroll? Is there anything here?
I have to say I would grade this incomplete. There are too many unknowns about this to get too excited. There was a world a couple years ago where Arthur Smith was the hot head coaching name, and when he got hired by Atlanta, and when he was going through the process and people were trying to get him, he was the offensive guru of the future. That was Arthur Smith. So, and he's the worst. So what the league says and what the analysts say about Mike Macdonald, we don't know, but he doesn't have offensive coordinators or defensive coordinator yet. We don't know what connections he have. Is if all he is a sharp byproduct of Harbaugh and a smart guy and all this stuff, good press conference, looks good and all that. We don't know what kind of offense he's going to run, who he's going to hire to run it, how responsible he was for the defense in Baltimore. Because if he was responsible for a lot of it, then there's going to be hope, at least for the defense. But if he was just carrying the water like a lot of these Rams, if you're the Rams offensive coordinator, you're not calling the plays. Andy Reid's offensive coordinators aren't really running the offense. So I just don't know what Mike Macdonald really did, what his resume is. He's another one where we'll tell a lot more by what coordinators he's able to get. And there's still a lot of offensive coordinator openings, and there ain't no offensive coordinators out there that are here's the next superstar. There's not there's 5 of them available. There's 8 offensive coordinator openings right now. And I don't know that there's any great coordinators out there to be had. So does he hire a retread? Does he pull something because he does have this connection down in the college ranks and everything else? So we have to take a pass on this one and just see what coordinators he gets, because he's also saddled with Geno. Geno's fine, but you're not going to overtake the 49ers and the Rams most likely with Geno Smith.
Yeah.
So Well, unless you have a killer defense. So we'll see. He's the one that's going to be kind of stuck with a quarterback, unless the whole Pete Carroll firing and all that was because they're getting ready to move on from Geno Smith.
Could be. Maybe they're going to try to make a move
Yeah.
in the draft as well. Go for one of the
So
top three.
I'm a total question mark on Macdonald. There's not enough history to know, and we haven't seen him hire his staff yet to be able to criticize it or applaud it.
Yeah. But RC, we got one more left, and this is former Falcons coach Dan Quinn. He was most recently the defensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys, who became the first 2 seed to lose to a 7 seed in the playoffs, where Dan Quinn's defense just let Green Bay have their way with him. And pretty much Washington, I think, was pretty hot on Ben Johnson. I think that's where a lot of people were tying him to. But then I think Monday morning, a lot of reports came out that Ben Johnson was commanding a lot of money, which makes me think that maybe Ben Johnson backed out and Washington needed an excuse that like something out there to why they couldn't get their guy and ended up settling for Dan Quinn. And now there were reports that Washington was even interviewing Bill Belichick. RC, do you think Dan Quinn can do something here?
It feels like a panic move. It feels like we got jilted by everybody else. Now we've got to hurry up and hire somebody because the clock is ticking and all the good ones, all the good young coordinator types and have been hired. So we'll go. Dan Quinn, to me, is a total manufactured candidate. He wasn't that good in Dallas. Everybody's talking about what a great job he did in Dallas. He did great when Dallas had a good game. Then they were, putting the camera on him and talking about what a genius he was. When they were getting their butts handed to them a lot of the time on defense in the second half of the season and into the playoffs, they weren't putting the camera up and showing Dan Quinn pumping his fist at another Micah Parsons sack of the New York Giants or Arizona Cardinals or whatever, the New York Jets, whatever flimsy offenses Dallas took advantage of in the beginning of the season. They've totally fizzled to the finish line and then got embarrassed in the playoffs. How a team could look at the way that Dallas ended that season, last season, on defense and say, "Yep, Dan Quinn is our guy," I can't believe it. And they probably thought Washington. I'll bet Seattle was trying to get Dan Quinn potentially, and may have had also been interested in Macdonald, but that Dan Quinn has history there, and Dan Quinn's team may have bluffed Washington into, if you don't hire us, Seattle's going to, and then who are you going to be able to get? Are you sure Mike Macdonald's going to come over, or is he going to back out on you like Ben Johnson did? So they may have bluffed, Dan Quinn may have bluffed his way into the head coaching job in Washington. I thought he did a mediocre job in Dallas. He did a mediocre job in Atlanta. He thanks his lucky stars. Kyle Shanahan was his offensive coordinator. They had a moment. There are plenty of coaches that have a moment. Race through the playoffs. But it doesn't mean that unless they do it consistently, it doesn't mean that they're great coaches. So Dan Quinn had his one-time wonder moment and has been fading ever since. Why Washington did this, I have no idea.
Yeah, it definitely seems like a panic move to me. I don't know what Ben Johnson was commanding from the Commanders, or maybe it was the fact that, like, hey, like, I want to wait for the next cycle. Like, all the assistants are gone. Like, it's going to be hard to, like, really pull together a staff. Like, let me go back to Detroit. Let's try to make another run. And maybe some of these old heads are going to retire next year, like Kansas City, Andy Reid. Maybe he'll go next year, or possibly that could even happen this year. And we'll get more into that. But
he may know something about the Kansas City situation and that's where he's going to wind up.
Yeah.
Or he's hoping that's where he
That's
winds up.
probably where he has his eyes set. I want to take over for Andy Reid because I think if that happens, if they win a Super Bowl, if they lose, I don't think Reid retires. If they win and he becomes the first coach since Belichick to go back-to-back, win 3 out of the past 5 years or whatever, I think he might hang it up. I mean, he is on the older side, so maybe that's what Ben Johnson has his eye on. Let me go for Mahomes. And it could I wouldn't be shocked if he reneged his deal with Detroit if that happened a week from 2 weeks from now and ran to Patrick Mahomes. I mean, who wouldn't? You'd be crazy not to consider it.
Next year you could see prime places to live, coaching jobs open up like New Orleans, Miami,
Dallas.
and Dallas, and there's one other in Tampa Bay. Could all be opened up next year.
You don't pass
and
up
be
Patrick
better
Mahomes.
better geographies. I'll just say if he doesn't get a shot at the Mahomes thing.
Right.
There's going to be opportunities to be in geographies. He probably wanted that Chargers gig, but you ain't going to beat out Harbaugh for that.
Right.
Then all these other ones, I'm surprised he didn't go for Tennessee. Maybe he was just asking for too much money. He is a hot name, so he probably tried to leverage it, and these owners cheaped out and just went with a Canales.
If I'm a hot name in that market and you want me to coach Carolina or Washington or a place that's just toxic like that, yeah, I'm gonna want 6 years, $20 million. Like, I know you're probably gonna fire me 1 year because of this retread roster you gave me. Like, I need some security here, and that's probably what he was looking for, and they didn't give it. Dan Quinn just like probably knew the writing was on the wall and with Dallas, and this was his last shot maybe to become a head coach. So see if he can make the most with it in Washington. But RC, speaking of coaches that you love, let's jump straight into the offensive coordinators hirings, and let's start from the top. Pittsburgh getting Arthur Smith, pairing him up with Kenny Pickett, George Pickens. I know Najee Harris and Jalen Warren might be excited because they're probably going to run the ball a lot, and George Pickens is already starting his cryptic tweets to try to get on his way out of there. But RC, this feels like a disaster to me. What do you think?
If I'm George Pickens, I tell my agent, who would have already known before George Pickens did, I'm telling my agent, go to them behind the scenes. I want out. We can either do this quietly or I can make an ass out of myself, but I ain't playing. I am not staying for another year of this crap. Any hope that Kenny Pickett had, who I still think is a talented quarterback, ruined by the Steelers' offensive situation. It gets even worse with Arthur Smith. So they can go, and I'm so happy for this to happen to the Steelers because the Steelers are not going to go forward until they get Mike Tomlin out of there. So Arthur Smith may be the ticket to blowing that whole thing up. So from that perspective, I think it's a good thing for my Pittsburgh faithful that you might be now a year away because like if the offense is a disaster, the Steelers finish in last. This is all on Tomlin, and they're going to be like, we can't do this any longer. We need a refresh.
Could even be a mid-season firing, and maybe
I don't think they would do that to him. I don't think they would do that to Tomlin. And I think Tomlin would like to be on the open market because he'd get snatched up quick.
Man, I would love to see your reaction if Arthur Smith became the interim coach of Pittsburgh because you'll have to deal with him for an extended period. But
and Tomlin may have done this because he wants out of Pittsburgh. He's like, you can't find a graceful way out of this situation.
Yeah, this is one way of doing it. This is one way to.
Please fire me, give me the rest of my contract, and then I'll be the hottest free agent coach there is.
Yeah. I'm sure Dallas would chomp at the bit to hire him, but RC, let's talk about Dallas's division rival, Philadelphia, who lost two great offensive coordinators, and then ended up with two so-so ones this season. And basically, they hired a new offensive and defensive coordinator. Let's start with the OC, who's a familiar face in the NFC East, Kellen Moore, who used to be Dallas's OC, went over to the Chargers last year, now is with the Eagles. Do you think this was a good hire by Philadelphia?
So Dallas gets rid of Kellen Moore and the offense gets better. Dak gets better. And then the Chargers bring in Kellen Moore and their offense gets worse. So how Kellen Moore has a hireable track record, I have no idea. Sirianni's desperate. These are desperate hires of guys with recent failures, him and Vic Fangio. This is one of these guys, one of Kellen Moore, Vic Fangio, is going to be a head coach next year. By about week 5 or 8, one of them is going to be the interim head coach of the Eagles. I think this signed and sealed and delivered Nick Sirianni's unemployment coming soon. I haven't seen Kellen Moore do anything that
RC,
great.
I remember when Sirianni was hired and how you were kind of lower on him, but then all of a sudden the Eagles in 2021 last year, because of their good coordinators, covered up for Sirianni. And I always kind of had that in the back of my head, like, why was RC low on him? And then you kind of saw it when he lost these two stalwarts of coaches. Couldn't really do much.
Yeah, he didn't have an answer. And last year would have been the, hey, Nick Sirianni's going to make the decisions. And then I saw the decisions he made, and I went, ugh. But
yeah,
I didn't realize how good I mean, there are teams that lose when Doug Peterson lost Frank Reich. Everybody, oh my, they lost Frank Reich. Oh, what is he going to do? He lost Frank Reich. Well, Frank Reich's terrible. So it wasn't losing Frank Reich wasn't the downfall of Doug Peterson. But Nick Sirianni's case, it looks like Steichen and Gannon are great young coaches, especially Gannon. And then to watch their teams overperform, to watch the Eagles collapse. I mean, even the Eagles' hot start was very, very lucky. And then once it started sliding, man, they got out of control fast. And if you hire, who's the expatriate guy they had to
Matt Patricia.
When you hire Matt Patricia on purpose as part of your new plan, you should have known trouble was coming. So then he reaches for recently failed Kellen Moore in his last 2 stops, and recently Vic Fangio, who I thought was this defensive guru, I thought that was one of the worst coaching jobs of the year was what Fangio did to Miami. And it had to be bad if Miami brought him in to be the genius that everybody thought that he was, and then they fire him in a year.
It seemed like there was something more going on there. It feels like the players didn't seem like they got it along with him.
Oh,
it seemed like
the
coaches,
yeah.
So I don't know, but let's talk about a coaching tree that's been positive. I mean, it feels like almost everybody that comes off the McVay and Shanahan coaching tree, offensive, defensive, they end up working out. I think the only one that hasn't is Brandon Staley. But when Raheem Morris took over for the coach of the Falcons, he also brought along Zach Robinson from the Rams. Obviously, this guy's a pretty green coach. This is the first time he'll be an OC. Without a quarterback, though, RC, I mean, you can beat Kyle Shanahan, but without a QB, I don't know what Robinson's going to do. So we'll see what happens there.
A lot's going to be on his shoulders. The input from Zach Robinson and Morris and the GM will tell a lot of Zach Robinson's prowess by what quarterback they do wind up with, whether that's via the draft or free agency. So I just assume if Sean McVay thinks you're a good coach, I'm inclined to believe you're probably a good coach. So I'll put the hopeful label on Zach Robinson, but I want to see what um, quarterback he gets.
And he
But
was a coveted name, RC. I think he was the top OC name on the market. And he might not have a quarterback, but Falcons have a pretty decent offensive line. They have receiving weapons. Obviously, Kyle Pitts hasn't even been unlocked yet, so it'll be interesting to see if Robinson can do that. And, I know you're not thinking that Bijan Robinson's not generational, but I think him
he's
and
good.
Algier, they're a good 1-2 punch.
Yeah, it's a great 1-2 punch. I'm not anti Bijan Robinson. I'm anti Bijan Robinson is a generational talent, the likes of which we've never seen before. So, but he's good, and Tyler Algier is good. So, and Kyle Pitts should be the generational talent is Kyle Pitts. So, everything's looking up. We just have to see what they're going to do at quarterback. But before Zach Robinson, I think it was Shane Waldron who went to Seattle off the Rams staff in a similar way. Everybody wanted Shane Waldron. If I remember that correctly, he's from the Rams tree. And when Seattle overhauled their situation, Shane Waldron bolted. So to the Bears. So the Bears, speaking of teams that are getting McVayites in their system, that the move to Shane Waldron, we'll see. He did a good job in Seattle. He's got the McVay background. That's a huge step up from Luke Getz. I mean, that is changing your destiny type of move as an offensive coordinator if Eberflus will let Waldron handle the offense and not get involved. Eberflus will just stay over on the defensive side and let Waldron handle the offense. That could be one of the best moves of the year.
He was the passing coordinator for the Rams when they won the Super Bowl, went to Seattle right after that, RC. And, you talked about Canales helping out Geno, but I mean, this guy was the OC when Geno rose up. So, he's done great in his last two spots. And Chicago, say what you want about Fields or whatever they're going to do in the draft, but they have a ton of cap space. They have the potential to really flip this franchise around. I don't know that I trust Poles so much to be a shrewd operator. He lucked into that move to get away from Bryce Young, in my opinion. I don't want to say that he was like, oh, I want to trade back because I don't want to draft Bryce Young, because should have taken CJ Stroud right there. Yeah. He had a shot. That's why I'm not giving him so much credit. He made a good move, but it wasn't the best move.
I would agree with all of that. So I'll be interested to see what he did. He made luck into it again. They may just go, we're sticking with Justin Fields, and I don't know that I can fully blame them given the crop of quarterbacks coming in. So why not just stick with Fields? And
why not stick with
trade
Fields?
The pick? And I know it's going to cost them money, but all quarterbacks are going to cost money.
Trade back with the Raiders, get 5 first-round picks, sign a bunch of free agents, see what you can do, and
negotiate with Fields now of saying, look, here's the deal, or we're going to trade you to wherever we want to trade you to. So take this reasonable deal, and we won't draft a quarterback in round 1. Leverage it to stick with Fields.
Yeah, because I mean they don't have he still has the 5th-year option. So I think this is his is he entering his 4th year or is he entering his 3rd year? I forget.
This is year 4 coming up.
So
this
they
is
need
the time you can do a early
5th year
renewal.
Yeah, so you can do the 5th year
or
option.
hang on to him and do the 5th year option.
Yeah,
and just buy yourself more time.
I mean, if you really think about it, RC, add up year 4, year 5, 5th year option, and then the franchise tag value. Those 3 years, they can have him under contract with little. I mean, the franchise tag will be a lot of money, but it's a 1-year commitment. So, that is what he's stuck in Chicago with.
And Luke Getsy is awful. So Fields did fine for what he is. He's not Tom Brady, but for what he is, he's a potentially better Lamar Jackson, sturdier Lamar Jackson, better armed Lamar Jackson. Maybe Shane Waldron will be the ticket to unlock another level in him.
And hopefully, if they make it far, he won't forget that, hey, this is maybe a run first offense, just the way that Todd Monken forgot about it. And it was so funny because every time they ran Edwards or Hill, they were gashing the Chiefs, but they just got away from it. And hopefully Shane Waldron doesn't make a mistake like that down the line because, like you said, Fields isn't Brady, Burrow, Mahomes. Same with Lamar Jackson. He's great, but in his own right.
And Baltimore could have won that game. They played well enough. It's not like either of those teams had a great offensive day. If Zay Flowers doesn't fumble going into the end zone, who knows what happens in that game. So you can win with Lamar Jackson. You can win with Justin Fields. They're not my preferred quarterbacks, but I'd maybe take the Justin Fields devil I know versus any of the guys in this draft. And just buy more time to see upcoming draft classes and see if Tyson Bagent can be developed more.
We got 2 more OCs for you, RC. Ken Dorsey with Cleveland. So
an awful offensive coordinator, and I cannot believe Cleveland hired that. It means Stefanski's really going to be try to be in charge. Those two will be fighting. That'll be ugly. It's Deshaun Watson on top of everything else. They all deserve each other. I hope they all eat each other alive like a bunch of hungry alligators trapped in a small space, just eating the tails of each other and legs and limbs and everything until they're all dead.
All right. I didn't know that there was a coordinator that triggered you more than Arthur Smith, but I'll keep that one in my back pocket when I want to piss you off one day. But I mean, in all seriousness, though, when Ken Dorsey left Buffalo, all of a sudden a light switch went on in that organization and they went from missing the playoffs to winning the division and getting the 2 seed and running Dalvin Cook and Josh Allen not forcing the ball to Stephon Diggs every throw. So they looked a lot better with Joel Brady than with Ken Dorsey.
Well, they went way down when he first took over. There was a huge drop from the Dayball era to Dorsey. Then they stuck with Dorsey and struggled. And then the second that they replaced him with Brady, they went up. So everything was down with Dorsey. I think he's terrible in a different way than Arthur Smith, who's terrible. But at least Arthur Smith is going somewhere where him and Mike Tomlin are going to be on the same page. So they can hold hands and drive the car off the cliff together. But Dorsey and Stefanski are going to fight each other. Tomlin and Smith are going to love each other, but Dorsey and Stefanski is going to be ugly.
So we'll get a lot more memes of him like smashing iPads and stuff. Do you remember that when Miami beat Buffalo, I think last year?
Yeah, he should be the totally chillest dude in the room because I can't believe anybody hired him. He should be thankful
he got a second opportunity.
That he got another opportunity this fast.
And RC, last one, and this one I think you liked, Cliff Kingsbury with the Raiders, which was just announced tonight. So that I hearing you talk about it, I think I see your logic there with Pierce making a more of a not gunslinger. I don't know I'm trying to find the right words for it, but more of an out of the box hire. I didn't really think that he would go with Kingsbury either, but I'm hopeful. So hopefully they can get a quarterback to help him out.
There's like 6 or 7 offensive coordinator jobs still out there. So Kingsbury probably could have had maybe any one of them he wanted, depending on his price tag. He was interviewing with a lot of these teams. So the fact that he went with Antonio Pierce, Cliff Kingsbury's no fool. He is a very much an opportunist. He would only go there if they assured him of 2 things. One, that they're not going forward with Aiden O'Connell as their quarterback. primary plan, and two, Kingsbury was going to be able to run the offense the way he wanted to run the offense. There's no way Kingsbury would just. He's not damaged goods. Like Ken Dorsey would agree to anything to get another job. There's a lot of guys that would agree to anything to get another job. Kingsbury didn't have to do that. Kingsbury had choices, would have choices, could have college choices. He doesn't need the money. He's got plenty of money. This is about the opportunity for Kingsbury to link up with something successful and get back to being known as a top offensive mind. I don't think he is, but he thinks he is, and he's earned the right to go out and have another shot to prove it with his system. He only goes to Las Vegas if there's no way that Antonio Pierce said, "Hey, if you come here, we're doing the Arthur Smith, we're doing the Mike Tomlin thing. We are going to run, and play good defense. We do not want to throw the ball unless we have to." I can't believe that was said, and I can't believe Cliff Kingsbury would agree to that. So they had to give him a blank check to do what he wants with the offense, and that they're going to get him a quarterback that fits his system.
It's a good move for Pierce because he could sort of be that CEO.
That's what he should be. He should be the Dan Campbell. He's following the Dan Campbell model. So I have a lot of hope now for Antonio Pierce, where 24 hours ago I did not.
So we're not going to touch every DCRC, but you kind of got into Vic Fangio. I don't know if there's anything more you want to say about him, but let's also talk about Ryan Nielsen going from Atlanta to Jacksonville.
I thought that was one of probably the single best defensive coordinator move of the offseason so far. Very under the radar. What he did with the Falcons was pretty remarkable last year. The Falcons had a much improved defense, one of the toughest secondaries to throw on. They broke down very late in the season, but through about the first 13, 14 or so weeks, you couldn't. When I was, doing projections for fantasy, it's like, okay, if a team is great against the pass, it probably means they're exposed against the run, or if they're great against the run, you can throw on them like the Lions. You look at the Falcons, you're like, I don't know if there was a defense I feared more for my fantasy players than when they were facing Atlanta, because they were good on the run and they were good against the pass. So that's Nielsen in his first year, and when he was an assistant coach on the rise, I think he should have been chosen over Dennis Allen, but he left when Dennis Allen got installed, or a year,
1 year later,
year later, took the opportunity in Atlanta, and a lot of this, there was a handful of Saints players that followed him over there that swore by the guy. So you like to see that, and then he did a turnaround in Atlanta where they were actually a really good defense. They ditch him because they're changing over the whole system, and Jacksonville, who desperately needed a defensive coordinator, man, they pick up the rebound. That is a huge. There's a lot of teams still looking for defensive coordinators. There's a lot of teams that named new defensive coordinators with their new head coaches. Ryan Nielsen should have been one of the hot names out there, and he just totally went under the radar and falls right into Jacksonville's lap. And Doug Peterson's a good coach. So
yeah,
I
think that
smart,
was
good thing, especially in that division.
Yeah, they'll need him, especially because they'll be playing against Levis, Anthony Richardson, CJ Stroud. But one thing about the Falcons, they haven't been known for a good defense. So the fact that they fielded not a good one, but a great one. I mean, I'm with you. When I'm setting my DraftKings lineups, fantasy football, whatever, I was always nervous this year going up against Atlanta's secondary, even their run defense. Whereas years past, that was the team we targeted playing our fantasy players against, kind of like how we targeted Detroit's passing game, right? Like we love playing QBs against that defense. Atlanta was like that not too long ago, and hopefully they don't revert back under Morris. But it's hard. It's easy to wonder whether that was more Nielsen than anything.
I would run the numbers, start running them on a Monday, and into Tuesday for the upcoming week for fantasy, and I'd look and I'd go, why is this running back, or why is this wide receiver so down low in the system? And I looked, oh, okay, they're playing Atlanta, and I'm like, well, that's wrong. That can't be right. Why would they be so down against Atlanta? Then I would look at the numbers and go, holy crap, man, Atlanta's killing running backs. They're killing wide receivers. Like, how is Atlanta? That's another strike against Arthur Smith. It's like you had all the elements to be a really good team. Imagine if he would have stumbled into Will Levis and let Will Levis be Will Levis with with Ryan Nielsen and an emerging defense, a good enough defense to win that division, and all the weapons and a great offensive line.
He would have been there for 10 years. He would have been there for Smith would have kept his job.
He may have blown it. He may have had it underperform, but it still would have been the best in the NFC South right now.
Yeah.
He was a Will Levis away, and he blew it because he could have had it, but he was going to go with Desmond Ritter.
He could have had that
fantasy or Football Outsiders, the big analytics house from 20 years ago that hasn't been relevant for 19 years, but was one of the first analytics places. Their big claim a couple years ago is Desmond Ritter was an elite NFL quarterback, and here's all the analytics is why. So Arthur Smith can blame his subscription to Football Outsiders for his downfall. He should have took Will Levis.
RC, you're going to get these fantasy football outsiders to freaking start attacking us. I don't know if you saw JJ Watt bad-mouthing PFF on Pat McAfee's show, but then some PFF writers on Twitter or owners or whatever started going after JJ Watt. And I'm like, really? You're going to tell one of the greatest defensive players of all time that football better than he does? Like,
and they anybody might, but you can't. You're not going to win that argument. Nobody's going to.
It looked so petty, RC. I'll send you the link. It's like 4 long tweets explaining why PFF is like the best rating system. I'm like, dude, cut your losses, man. Like this is terrible. And he's a well-known guy. Like he had a lot of followers. I was shocked that an affiliate of PFF like that, a high-up guy, actually went after JJ Watt like that. It was crazy.
I mean, when you're making a call on 600 to 800 college players every year coming into the league, you're going to get things wrong, and you can get high-level things wrong. But my defense currently to anybody who wants to complain about whatever take or point, were you for Bryce Young? That's all I need to hear. And you can't answer anything but yes, you were, because there was no one against Bryce Young last year. And I took a lot of crap for coming right out of the gates and saying that there was a big problem looming with Bryce Young, and then pushed it even further when we got to see him in practices and the preseason. So all of those PFFs and all that kind of stuff, I don't know if they can probably make the claim that they are the best rating service, because who else is there? So, and I know the way they do their business, especially years back. I don't know about now as much, but very flawed. It's like judging art. It's it's not scientific. You can't be scientific judging expected yards and judging just judging a broken tackle, or judging whether somebody, a defensive end or an edge rusher, won the snap against their blocker. Sometimes it's obvious, and sometimes it's very like, is this neutral or a win? But I know that if they're like, well, this player is great, so it probably was a win. I need to see greatness. I need to grade greatness because this guy's supposed to be great. I won't lose my job if I grade a great guy great.
Yeah, and RC, one other thing that you pointed out, you were never high on Trevor Lawrence either, and he was everyone's preseason MVP pick. So, I mean, like, one thing, just being a fan of FF metrics, working for you, whatever, like, the QB is one thing that you have a pretty good hit rate on. Like, that's probably what you like specialize in. So, I mean, yeah, it's pretty
Uh,
crazy at how like someone could look. I mean, I'm not as into scouting as much as you are, but just watching those 4 games that Desmond Ridder played for the Falcons in 2022, in 2022, yeah, the season before, it's obvious this guy had no business in the NFL, and yet people high up in the Falcons organization, Arthur Smith, people that have been coaching their whole life, said, no, this
People that
guy's the
make
starter.
7 figures to do these things were like, we'll take them. And there sat Will Levis, and all anybody did was tear him down. That guy was going to be a top 5 pick, and they tore him down to where he wasn't even in the first round.
Stroud was going to be the first overall pick. Then this S2 test comes out of nowhere and it takes him to number 2, where Houston Texans, I swear, if you guys are the creators of the S2 test, like, props to you. You pull the page out of like China's propaganda playbook, man, because that was some serious damage you did to CJ Stroud. But you got your guy, man.
We never heard about the S2 test until really last year. They came out hard, and then all of a sudden, we had it with Burrow, and we hit it with this, and everything they had was right. So, but then they had to make a prediction. Then it tell you about what they thought about after the fact. Last year was the first time that they were really out there in the public's, with, hey, this is the way these guys tested, and Bryce Young tested so high, and CJ Stroud is questionable. So that blew up. I mean, that had to set that company back a lot of money, a lot of seed money, and a lot of everything else when they tried to denigrate CJ Stroud. Which I'm sure
Unless
their testing probably said that. It's just now you have to question their testing.
unless it's Nick Casario's company and he just closed it and is
That's
laughing at that.
no, I think it
Anyways,
was.
conspiracy.
I think the Texans were trying to move up to number 1 to get Bryce Young.
Oh, okay. Well, that debunks my theory, and they prevented themselves from making a huge
Yeah,
mistake. Because whatever we think about D'Amico right now and how great this Texans team is, none of that would be possible
the
without CJ Stroud.
Texans' history for the next decade was made by not being able to get the Bryce Young.
And they can thank Lovie Smith for winning that last game against Indy, which tanked them from number 1 to number 2. So everyone thought, oh, you did Chicago a favor. In reality, it looks like you did Houston a favor.
All of the organizations had Bryce Young atop their board last year. I don't care what they say now. They all had Bryce Young atop their boards. And not only was that wrong, it's not like, well, CJ Stroud's so good, but man, so okay, Bryce is a close second. So yeah, we should have took Stroud, but we're fine with Bryce. Bryce is going to be a bust.
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean, it's one of the epically worst scouting things to have happened in maybe since Jamarcus Russell.
yeah, that is not a name you want to be associated with if you're a first overall QB. But one thing you said stuck with me: the 3 other guys taken after him, like they might not only be good, but they can be great QBs. I mean, CJ Stroud's already there. Anthony Richardson has probably the most upside out of anyone taken, and then Will Levis is also really freaking good, and they're all in the same division, which is really cool. Like that, I think that's gonna sting Carolina more than anything. It's not like just take anyone not named Bryce Young and you would have been fine.
All those 3 guys this year, with the opportunities that they had, and Richardson and Levis had limited opportunities, blew me away with what they were able to accomplish in such short order, in such weird circumstances. I mean, Richardson came out of the gates. We'd already, after about week 3, it was, oh crap, Richardson was really the best quarterback of this draft. Everybody should have took Richardson. Why did they look past Richardson? It took a couple more weeks before it became C.J. Stroud, but then we lost Richardson. Who knows what would have happened? Can you imagine if all three of those guys played from week one?
Oh man,
The number, the debate, the arguments that would be going on um, about which one really is the best. So it was just C.J. Stroud got the opportunity and didn't get hurt, till late and just missed a couple games. But we could be talking about Anthony Richardson. I mean, the Colts got the 9-8 without Anthony Richardson. Was it 9-8 or 8-9? I think it was 9-8.
I think so. Yeah, it was definitely not 8-9. It was either 9-8 or 10-7.
Without Richardson, if they had Richardson, they would have won that division.
Yeah, that for sure. I mean, they
and
did
then
that
we'd be
with
talking
Minshew.
about Anthony Richardson as the best in this draft.
The problem with him is the guy started 5 games, and in 3 of them he exited early. The last one he ended up being out for the season. So it's going to be like he can be as good as he wants, as electric as he wants, if he can't stay on the field.
But when he was in,
one of the best, man. It was crazy.
You didn't need to be a 20-year scout to know that was something special. It took Stroud about 2 weeks before he started showing he was special. And I think what Levis did really trumps all of them because he had the worst situation you could possibly be in. And to pull off some of the games and throws and things with Chris Moore and Westbrook-Akine as his wide receivers and third string bad offensive lines. What he did in some of those games, I mean, like his first game out of the box was at the 4-touchdown game. Then there was the Miami comeback game. I mean, even in his bad, if you look at this statistically,
he had moments.
Not great games. You just watch the throws he makes. Or attempts to make. I don't know. He hardly had a bad throw. He had a rare bad throw. Most of his throws were right on the money, out so fast and traveling through the air so quickly, defenses couldn't react to it. I am stunned at how good Will Levis is, and the fact that all the teams that are in need of quarterbacks now could have all had him.
Everyone passed on him. He was a 2nd-round pick. It's not like,
teams could have traded up that if they didn't have a 1st-round pick, they could have traded up into the 1st round and gotten the pick and taken them.
Yep, exactly. RC, we talked a lot about the new coaching hires, but one thing I wanted to also discuss is whether you see any coaching changes that there are no real vacancies now, but we talked a little bit about Kansas City and maybe Andy Reid retires if the Chiefs win the Super Bowl. Do you see any other potential openings coming up in the next couple weeks?
I wonder if Andy Reid does go, if they'll do Matt Nagy on a short leash contract to try to keep continuity because he has history there and has been a head coach before. I think it'd be a big mistake, but I wonder if they will just slide Nagy in there or if they'll make the big move after Ben Johnson. But I think no matter what happens, unless the 49ers shut out Kansas City, I think Steve Wilkes is gone in San Francisco. I don't know who they're going to replace him with, but that defense has been a disaster in the playoffs and
since the Ravens game.
Yeah, for the last 6 weeks. It wasn't great all along. It got lucky that it had the Steelers to start the season off right, so that they had good numbers for a while because they had that Steelers game where they virtually shut them out. But then as the season went on, they started getting exposed, and then they really started falling apart in the second half. And the look on Shanahan's face with Goff going off on him and Jordan Love going off on him, but especially the Detroit game in the first half, I thought maybe Steve Wilkes isn't going to come out for the second half. Maybe they're gonna make the change at halftime. It was so bad. So unless San Francisco pulls a miracle, and even if they do, have some defensive gem I think Wilkes is gonna be gone, win or
Yeah,
lose.
I bet Kyle's calling up his old buddy D'Amico and asking him for some advice on what's wrong with the defense, how to fix it, because it's certainly not the talent, RC. They have a lot invested up front. They got two really, really good linebackers in Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw. So it's like it's hard to really see what's going on. I guess since they lost that safety, Ufunga, that I feel like that's sort of like the turning point for their defense. I think that was
When they
Thanksgiving.
traded for Chase Young, it also started to go down.
Yeah, maybe he added some toxicity to that.
Oh yeah, I mean he's a weight. I mean guys like that are you had two guys that are a waste on 90% of their snaps because all they're trying to do is get sacks. That's Bosa and Young. And if they don't get to the quarterback, then you got wide open spaces to run through. You're going to be able to throw the ball, swing it out, as long as they don't get to you. And they're only going to get to you once or twice a game. So Chase Young is a disaster. Steve Wilkes, well, there's plenty of job openings, so he will, like, the Giants will take anybody right now. So I think Steve Wilkes is destined for either the Giants or the Commanders. Probably not the Commanders.
What
But
about Dallas?
I think Steve Wilkes will be headed to. I like him to go to the Giants. I, I don't possibly. That's not crazy.
Al Woods, they're suspecting is going to take over for Dan Quinn, but don't be surprised if Dan Quinn tries to, or sorry, not Al Woods. Is it Al Harris, the defensive guy in Dallas? I think that he was like being coveted by some people. I'm not sure, but anyways, what stuck out to me though with what you were saying, RC, Detroit has one of the best offensive lines in the game too, so I don't want to take that away from them. So that I mean, it's still not an excuse for Chase Young, Nick Bosa, and all those boys that get paid a lot of freaking money not to be able to put pressure on Goff. But I think they'll have an easier time getting through the KC offensive line, even though Mahomes is harder to sack. I think they'll be able to add more pressure than they were able to with Goff.
Assuming that Tooney is back, I don't know. And for San Francisco, is supposed to be this great run defense, and then all of a sudden now everybody's running over them too.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the Chase Young effect is if you're going to put those two pass rushers in, there's going to be gaps to run through when those guys are going around the outside and taking way out of the play and leaving a giant space to run through. So I just think whatever it is about Steve, the defense for Shanahan looked a lot better with Salah and with DeMeco Ryans than it did with Steve Wilkes. So I think Shanahan will pull the plug and find a young up-and-comer to take over. Yeah. Who that is, I have no idea.
We'll see. And hopefully that's a little bit of a Super Bowl preview for the audience. We're obviously going to dive a lot more into that, break down the matchup, give prop bets and everything, parlays, whatever you want. We will discuss it next week with our with Chris Bolello from Bet the Close. So we'll have a nice podcast for you guys to prep for your Super Bowl betting ventures next week. But RC, before we wrap things up, I wanted to also give you time to talk about what you're seeing in the Senior Bowl, let the audience know about upcoming articles that you're going to drop and what we can expect from the college football world on FF Metrics.
I'm immersed in the Senior Bowl prospects right now. That's getting the practice week has come to an end. That's the most important part for scouting purposes. So I preview graded on very quick amount of tape, quick looks at all the Senior Bowl prospects before the Senior Bowl. Now that I've seen all of them that attended work at the Senior Bowl, I will regrade all of them as part of the process because then I'll regrade them when they go to the combine. So right now it's a lot to do with the NFL draft, Senior Bowl being a big part of that. Quarterback scouting. We did the top wide receivers already to kind of set the table. I'm doing the top quarterbacks right now. Then I'm going to probably deviate and jump into doing Brock Bowers to see if he's as good as what everybody is saying, because I don't think, just as a tease, I don't think Caleb Williams is as good as they say, and I didn't expect to think that. I don't think Marvin Harrison Jr. is close to the best wide receiver in this draft. So those are two very heretical statements. I'm not so sure that I'm not going to say the same thing about Brock Bowers and burst everybody's bubble on that too. And if that ends up being true, that Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison, and Brock Bowers are all Bryce Young frauds, I don't think they're that bad. This is going to be a very interesting NFL draft, because the best players are at these positions are not the guys that they're trying to jam down our throats. And for fantasy, it's going to provide the dynasty rookie draft. I mean, Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Brock Bowers may be the 1, 2, 3 in dynasty rookie drafts, and they all may be very highly overrated and not the. Caleb Williams is not our top rated, graded prospect at quarterback, and Marvin Harrison Jr. is not number one. He's not going to wind up, I guarantee you, by the time I get through the top 20 wide receivers out there, Marvin Harrison's even going to be in our top 5. And I don't know yet on Brock Bowers whether he's going to be the top tight end in this class, or if he is, that he's the thing, the generational. Every time you hear generational talent, you can almost not know anything about football and just bet that it's not true, and you'll be right. So you can do that scouting pretty easily. But I can't afford to be wrong. I can't afford to play games. We're all betting on these players prop wise, off season over under totals. When it comes to a quarterback, what effect is Caleb Williams going to have? Like, all the money we cashed in on Bryce Young. For fantasy, we're betting on, Marvin Harrison, Brock Bowers, all that. If you have high draft picks, it's going to mean, if I'm right, we're going to be trading in dynasty rookie drafts. So I'm working on all of those things, and I'm taking a relook at Caleb Williams. These real heretical ones, I will relook and get. Been bouncing things off of our other scout, Ross Jacobs, to just get a feel for what he's seeing as well, to see if he adds anything to it or makes me try to change my mind, or has some tape I need to look at, or a data strand I need to consider. But this could be one of the wildest NFL drafts, and then upcoming fantasy dynasty related things, because it's quite possible the 3 generational talents being shoved down our throats is not true.
And to everyone that hasn't checked out RC's site already, ffmetrics.com, to get all those articles, mock drafts by not only Ross Jacobs, but Xavier Cromartie, who's another FF Metrics scout, is going to be providing them too.
A professional mock drafter. We don't mock draft just for grins and clicks, and it's so fun to look at mock drafts, because it is. These guys enter contests, and Xavier Cromartie has won several contests over the Mel Kiper, all the big names you could think of. Xavier Cromartie's mock drafts end up being graded. That means, what he submits and what it ends up turning out to be, they grade those. They have point contests on how to grade people's mock drafts. Xavier Cromartie's at the top of his field, right in the number 1, 2 spot, back and forth for the last couple of years, trying to get back his number 1 spot. So our mock drafts are not just for grins. They are our guys with their having studied it for at least a decade, and their sources and everything else. It's not their feelings, it's what they think that the NFL is going to do. My job is to figure out what the right thing to do is for fantasy and for betting.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing about the NFL draft that a lot of people, if they get into betting, need to understand. It's an information-based handicapping style. It's not like, oh, I think that Casey's going to beat San Francisco. Here are all the trends, yada, yada. It's more, who do you think this team's going to draft? Not necessarily this player is better than player B, player X. So that's where it's a lot more interesting to bet. The more knowledge and information you have from the insiders and someone like Xavier Cromartie and Ross Jacobs, who are award-winning, really, really good mock drafters, this is where you want to put your money on. You want to rely on people that beat the market, beat the Mel Kipers of the world, and they've done that time and time again. So I'm excited to see what they come up with.
And they move as the information changes. They'll have post-Senior Bowl mock drafts. That'll be a big change from their pre-Senior Bowl mock drafts because they're reading the tea leaves. They're getting the information from all the various sources. Then they'll have pre-combine and post-combine. And, they'll keep, like a Rubik's Cube, they'll keep spinning it around trying to get to the finish line to submit the final one right before the draft for contest notoriety. So it's something we take pretty serious.
Yeah. And again, ffmetrics.com, go check it out, subscribe. RC, I know we wanted to keep this at 1 hour, but we're at 2. Never can get there. But thanks to everyone listening. We'll be back next week with our Super Bowl preview and best of luck.
You mean we'll be back with part 2? Because we got questions we still got to get to. We got 2 more hours to go.
Yeah, we'll save that for next week when Chris gets mad at us for going 3 hours. But yeah, for everybody, have a good night and thank you for tuning in.
Thank you, guys.